When you're ready to pop the question, the last thing you want to do is second-guess the ring. At BlueNile.com, you can design a one-of-a-kind ring with the ease and convenience of shopping online. Choose your diamond and setting. When you find the one, you'll get it delivered right to your door. Go to BlueNile.com and use promo code WELCOME to get $50 off your purchase of $500 or more. That's code WELCOME at BlueNile.com for $50 off your purchase. BlueNile.com, code WELCOME.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous two-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass?" So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
To get the Crime Writers on Aftershow right now, go to patreon.com/partnersincrimemedia.
I'm Rebecca Lavoie, and this is Crime Writers On, the original true crime review podcast that digs into true crime, pop culture, other podcasts. And this week we'll be talking about Mindhunter Season 2 on Netflix. We'll also go to court, the basketball court, that is, in ESPN's The Sterling Affairs from the 30 for 30 podcast. Joining me to get that done and a whole lot more is my real-life husband, true crime co-author, star of Stage, Screen, Radioactivity, and lover of 20-year-old baseball games with no stakes on television, Kevin Flynn. Hello, Kevin.
Rebecca, you're killing me. It was like the best of Pedro Martinez on the local sports network.
Yeah.
It was one of the greatest games he ever pitched from 2000.
I'm just glad you said baseball game.
20-year-old.
My very own Donald Sterling, Kevin
Oh,
Flynn.
my God.
I'm going to start wearing a visor to record this podcast. Also with us is journalist, true crime author, former defense investigator, licensed private investigator, and a certified tattoo artist, Lara Bricker. Hello, Lara.
Hello. Yes, that's me. You know, if this podcast thing doesn't work out, I'm pretty good at the tattoo thing. You can watch the video in our Facebook group.
It wasn't a tattoo, though. It was like...
It's a temporary tattoo.
Right.
It was like you took like a magic wand from bingo and just dabbed it right on somebody.
It was very exciting, Kevin. Pirate Rick assisted me.
Just so you know, like, I always make jokes about Kevin being an old man. Don't you think the magic wand from bingo reference proves that point, like with an underline?
Yeah, pretty much.
And finally with us is our captain of woke cynicism, the author behind the noir novels known as the City Trilogy, our Patreon book club host, and a guy who thinks a couple of bee stings are just as bad as a broken bone, Toby Ball. Hello, Toby.
It wasn't just a couple, Rebecca.
How many was it, Toby?
I didn't count them all. It was somewhere, it was in the low double digits.
Oh my God.
What happened?
I was just using the weed whacker and I disturbed a ground nest and, looked down and there was a whole bunch on me. And it's one of those, do you knock them off or do you run? And I started to knock them off and then saw how many were coming out. So I ran. It was sort of that crouch run where you're trying to knock them off, but at the same time also run and not fall. And who knows how many cars were driving by while I was doing this.
Sexy dad run is what it was.
Yeah, it was freaking awesome. But yeah, so I got stung a bunch of times.
Wow, yeah, that does sound worse than cancer.
It's somewhere in between cancer and broken bones.
Oh my God. Toby.
Now, if I'd been like allergic, it would have been a real problem. But
You just got your arm and didn't get like your...
It was all like well below the knee.
Wow, I'll be thinking about you next week, Toby, when I'm literally under the knife getting a steel plate like attached to my ankle with my skin flayed open.
Oh,
I'll be
God.
like, Toby's thing was way worse.
When did this become medical one-ups?
You know what the difference
and shit?
is, Rebecca? Is I was conscious while this was happening.
That's true.
Oh, God.
I wasn't asleep, pumped full of painkillers.
You guys, I'm the only one who hasn't had something happen. Is this like
wait.
That is going to happen to me now.
Just wait.
Yeah. You get all flushed when you go for a walk.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
Someone almost called you an ambulance.
They did. But it's okay.
So, Kevin, I want to just thank one of our listeners right now real quick. We want to give a special thanks to our listener, Kimberly, who sent us a little care package, including a couple of shirts that were for you specifically. One of them has the radioactivity symbol on it. What does it say?
Positively radiant.
And the other one says what, Kevin?
Thyroid cancer is a pain in the neck.
That's right. And she also sent me a wonderful custom water bottle with my name.
She knows her audience.
And I think also, by the way, maybe like the colors of the Italian flag. I'm not sure exactly. Red and green. It looks kind of Gucci. I don't know. I really love it. And I just want to thank you very much for sending that to us, Karen. You don't have to send us packages, friends. But when you do, we will thank you on the podcast. That's
an incentive. You don't have to send us a car, but if you do,
that's right.
We will drive
it. Kevin, before we get started with the show, I know you did this in a Facebook Live last week, so I just want you to briefly regale us. How was your time in the hospital in the lead-lined room getting your radiation? Did you survive it okay?
I obviously did. It was good. I mean, I'll get a body scan in a couple of days, so I'll know definitively if everything worked and where things are. But yeah, I took my my radioactive iodine pill and stayed in the hospital for 2 days. And it's really weird because usually, like, when you're in the hospital, you can't get out of bed. That's why you're in the hospital. So to have, like, you know, a whole room to yourself and you're kind of walking around and getting cold food and the nurses are coming to take your vitals, but they're all bound up. Yeah, it was. I loved it. I loved being able to check out. But I want to thank everybody who, who sent me well wishes, and it's been quite the journey, and hopefully we're going to be near the end.
Do you also want to thank the 75-year-old man they sent in to unclog your toilet when you clogged your toilet with radioactive poo in the lead-lined room?
I thought this was going to be the outfit. So, look, when you're in the hospital room, you know, everything's covered with plastic because everything inside you is radioactive, and so they want you to keep going to the bathroom as often as possible, and you got to flush 3 times. So when I finally moved on from number 1 to number 2,
did your business?
Everything's radioactive, so I was very aggressive about the toilet paper, and then when I flushed, it went and all the toilet paper clogged the drain, and the water starts to rise, and I'm like, oh my God, radioactive toilet water is going to come, and it's going to spill out and contaminate the room, and they're going to have to evacuate the ward, and all these like old people on with their medicines dripping in are going to be wheeled out in the parking lot, and there's going to be a news helicopter going, why has the hospital been evacuated? And some reporter would be like, it appears to be radioactive toilet water, Tom. And fortunately it didn't overflow, but they did have to send in a janitor who had to get all gowned up, right, and get all irradiated to go in and stick a plastic barbed dipstick.
Don't make it too gross. All I like to imagine,
it was 90% paper. It was fine.
Right, but I just like to imagine they were like, who's the oldest janitor we have? Who's the least likely to ever reproduce?
Yeah. Who's half dead already?
It doesn't matter.
Jim.
Yeah, his time is near.
Poor Jim had to take like a Silkwood shower on the way to work that day.
I had to talk him into it. Oh my God.
We'll give you a bonus. He was like those guys who like dove into the Chernobyl plant. Like
he did it for Mother Russia.
Naked wearing boots.
Anyway, not to get too scatological, but you look great. You seem healthy. We were able to touch for the first time and be like close to each other for the first time yesterday. It was very exciting for both of us. It was like being married all over again, like we were newlyweds.
Wow.
Except we're fat and old now. But anyway, I'm so happy that you're doing better just in time.
Thanks. I mean, I'm not doing as poorly as Toby, but...
Yes, with his bee stings. But you're just in time to take care of me in my hour.
Look, I'm 100% serious. I would much rather have to go through thyroid cancer than get stung by a bunch of bees. You know that is my worst fear.
It's true. You're very scared of bees.
I'm so proud of Toby Ball. He's so strong.
What's the color $10 ribbon for bee stings.
I don't
He's
care.
not that strong now. I could take him, and I can't even
black
run, and
and
I
yellow
could take
stripes.
Toby right now.
It's yellow. It's yellow belly yellow.
Should we organize a 5K for survivors of bee stings?
Jesus.
Bee sting awareness.
Oh, dear.
Oh. Hey, there are people walking around with EpiPen saying, "That's not fucking funny, Rebecca."
We'll organize a 5K for you guys. Can participate in the 5K too. Can also be for bee sting allergy awareness. It's cool with me. I'm very open. My tent is open to you.
Okay. All right.
Instead of doing a walk a mile in her shoes, I could do a sting in her sling.
I think this is just it's just bullying now.
It is. And I am training for a 5K. Not that I'm actually going to do one, just because it was like a personal challenge. But I mean, I think the only way I might not come in dead last is if I was up against people with bee stings. So I can get behind this.
Just picture bees coming after you, and you'll go faster and faster.
Yeah.
Laura, I do wish you luck this time. I do remember a couple of years ago,
Yes.
You also started the Couch to 5K thing.
And I was like,
and about
fuck
halfway in it, you were like, I think I prefer the cookie butter lifestyle.
Yes, I do. And now I'm like, no, you know what? I've got to see it through this time. It's not pretty, but it's going to be done.
All right. Well, before we get started, just a quick promotion for our Patreon after show today. We are going to be talking about should I call it growing plagiarism story that's happening in the true crime podcast industry. You guys may have seen the headlines. We're going to sort of take the conversation to another level and talk about it a little bit more broadly in our Patreon after show. That you can find that right now in your feed if you're one of our patrons, or you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/partners in crime media. Of course, there you'll also find Married with Podcast, Laura Bricker's Leave It to Bricker podcast, and Toby Ball's Deep Dive Book Club. So much stuff in our Patreon, including a fascinating conversation about podcast plagiarism. All right, you guys ready to start the show?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Toby's so excited because we're talking about sports ball tonight.
I know.
I love going to a Clipper game. I'm serious. You sit anywhere you want to.
For decades, the LA Clippers were a laughingstock, perhaps the worst and most poorly run franchise in all of sports.
In trendy Los Angeles, two things are consistent. The Lakers win and the Clips lose.
30 for 30 podcast from ESPN returns with a look back at one of the strangest scandals in basketball history. The 5-part series, The Sterling Affairs, explores the downfall of Los Angeles Clippers owner Donald Sterling in a whirlwind of sex, race, and sports, all caught on audio tape.
In the middle of the 2014 playoffs, the Clippers suddenly got more attention than they could handle when the whole world heard this tape.
And you're allowed to Instagram. You don't have to have yourself with walking with black people. And it bothers me. Yeah, it bothers me a lot.
That's Clippers owner Donald Sterling arguing with his mistress.
Host and sports reporter Ramona Shelburne explains Sterling's checkered history, sudden implosion, and the fact that the league, the city, and the media shrugged off his despicable actions for years. Spoiler alert, we are going to be talking about plot points from the Sterling Affairs, so if you want to stay spoiler-free, jump to the time code for this review in our show notes. Now, Kevin, one of your first notes about this podcast was that this season of 30 for 30 is not flashy. It's a textbook radio story. What did you mean by that?
Well, it's a very competently put together podcast. I mean, there's no flashy, root talk kind of thing. There's no experimental thing that we have to do to demonstrate how loud a basketball is or something like that. It's just interview after interview. She gets everybody, puts it together in a comprehensive way that's understandable. I mean, I think it's, that's its strength. It very competently tells this story.
So, Toby, I know that you really love this podcast because you wrote a very positive review of it for Vulture in our little Vulture review blurbs that we sometimes do on this team. Do you want to just give your pitch as to why you thought this was such a good series?
I think there's a few things, and Kevin, I think, touched on one of them in that I think it's very well reported. There's not a whole lot of bells and whistles and stuff, but it tells the story, I think, both sort of comprehensively and coherently. I think they also get at what's important about the story. Part of it is, Donald Sterling was sort of reprehensible and getting rid of him and all that. But the whole thing about how this is really a way of a manifestation of, in the NBA, players sort of having more control over the league than players in other leagues generally do. And they don't go into this quite as much, but this is right when they were turning over the commissioner of basketball of the NBA for a long time had been this guy, David Stern, who had grown the league from being this sort of almost afterthought to this global juggernaut. But he was always kind of a owner's guy. So he would frequently get into sort of a confrontational stance with the players union when they're negotiating contracts and stuff. And so when he left and the new guy, Adam Silver, came on, like this happened very, very soon after he took over. And I think in some ways it was a changing of the guard, right? In that he, in this situation where there was an owner on one side who was in the wrong, obviously, and then players on the other side, and he like went hard on the player side. And I think that really set a tone and has kind of gotten him through some things afterwards. But the balance in the NBA of the power that the players have and the owners have is a lot different than the other leagues, like the NFL or Major League Baseball.
I was wondering, Toby, if that's why this series came out now. Because, you know, a lot of times stories like this, it's like, why right now? I mean, the previous 30 for 30 series, Bikram, was very much like in line with a lot of reporting around the Me Too movement when like a lot of those stories first started coming out. It was just very topical and very of the moment. You know, this happened a little ways back, and I found myself listening to it and thinking about, you know, they kept talking about the plantation mentality of this team, you know, the way that Donald Sterling treated these men, that, you know, they were sort of, he saw them as like, it's like a minstrel show, right? You show up and you watch these black guys perform for you, and he'd have them to his house and like, and parade them around like pieces of meat. And it was like really disgusting. And I was kind of thinking that like, that actually sounds a whole lot like a lot of other American sports today. You know, it sounds a lot like, to me, a lot of the complaints about the NFL. You look at the way black players are treated versus white players in the media and by the public when they have, God forbid, an opinion about something.
Right.
So do you think that's why they did this now? Is that why this story is interesting right now? Or isn't it interesting right now and they just did the story?
So that, I think that's part of it. I think another thing is that this summer was like sort of the apex of this whole player control over the league, in that you had a bunch of star players basically force their teams to trade them to other teams. It was a situation, again, unlike any other sport, where the players were in control.
Why has it got to be fashionable,
what do
Rebecca?
You mean?
Well, no, I mean, this is the second podcast that you've implied that the value of it is because it is tangentially tied to current events.
Well,
the story in of itself is really good.
Can I be transparent?
I hope you would.
Because somebody in our Facebook page asked me to ask that question.
Oh. Well, I don't know. I think it was an interesting story last year.
Yeah.
And it would be an interesting subject next year. I think why now? Because people are listening to podcasts.
Right.
That's the bigger answer.
Right. And this could have been a long form print story, but it is more interesting as audio because it also is based in a piece of audio that came out. Now, Laura, you said you didn't know much about the Donald Sterling episode except for, you know, the racist comments on the tapes. But then when you were listening to this, you heard something else that is also topical and current, right?
Yeah, I think that for me, when you were talking about why is this story being told now, you know, the first two episodes, I'm listening to this and I'm listening to just uncouth behavior and the way that he's interacting and the way that he's making his money and in sort of real estate. And I'm like, God, he kind of reminds me of Donald Trump. And then episode 3, they're like, he wanted to be the West Coast Donald Trump and actually paid somebody to get him in a magazine with, you know, that sort of branding. So I kind of wondered, as I was listening to it, and I was just listening to sort of the culture that surrounded him and the way that he treated people and the way that he talked, it's just sort of reminded me of a certain, I don't want to say like locker room conversation, like locker room sort of style talk that we've heard a lot about in other current events in politics recently. But it sort of was that, because it was like, here's this sort of time period where this is how men were acting in, you know, some positions where they had influence. And in this case, I was kind of glad to see he didn't get away with it. you know?
Now, Laura, we do have a lot of access to characters in the story. In
Yes.
particular, the one that really sticks out to me is Ramona's extensive interviews with Donald Sterling's wife, Shelley.
Yes.
I happened to be there to return something, and she was there with Donald and with some other friends. And we had a big confrontation. She was very, very, very nasty and mean to me.
What happened was that she ran into Shelley, I think at Nordstrom. And they started talking, and I guess things got out of hand.
That's Vistaviano's lawyer, Mac Nehore. And when I told Shelley Sterling his version of the story, she scoffed.
It was at Neiman Marcus.
What are your thoughts on Shelley? At first, when we first hear about her confrontation at the department store with her husband's mistress. But then as the series progresses, she becomes a more complicated character. I'm just curious to know your impressions of Shelley. What did you start with and what did you walk away with?
Yeah, I think when I finished this podcast, to me, Shelley was really, I think, one of the most interesting characters that we heard from, because she was just really complex to me. You know, in the beginning, I was like, oh, she's just there for the money. She's like this rich guy's wife. And like, I didn't necessarily think that, you know, she was going to have sort of the independence to stand up to things. And you're listening to these ongoing stories right from the beginning with the neighbor in the apartment who used to hear them fighting because Donald was cheating on her, you know, way early in the marriage. But as the story unfolds at the end and you listen to how she's actually the one who orchestrates the sale of the team and cuts Donald out of it, I was like, go Shelley. So there was a lot more going on there. She was a little bit more shrewd than I realized, I think. But I think it was really interesting to hear from her. But after all of that, I guess some things never changed. Now she's taking care of Donald again. So I don't know. Maybe that was like the joke's on us. She sold the team, but yet they still have all the money. I don't know.
Here's my take on Shelley. She's 100% complicit in like a lot of this bullshit. I mean, she's obviously not the person on the tape using racist language and being racist and characterizing black people as somebody you shouldn't be seen with and all the stuff that Donald Sterling said. But she admits that she admits it in a sideways way, that she was kind of complicit in their racist housing practices and their property management business. And she characterizes herself in a very interesting way when like asked about the infidelity and sort of why did you stay? She compares them to Hillary and Bill Clinton, which to me means that she definitely sees herself as a partner in this enterprise. When you hear about the backstory, she is a partner in the enterprise. And when you kind of hear how she fights back, taking him to court and so forth, like she's as powerful as he is in the relationship, which to me means she's also complicit in a lot of the stuff we hear. I mean, she co-hosted those white parties, as they were called, ironically.
Yes.
I mean, she co-hosted those things. They were at her home.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're trying to figure out like what do we think about Shelley? Because are we rooting for her, or do we also hold her accountable? I think it's a little of both. She certainly spent a lot of time in the Velvet Prison, you know, the one with the open door. She could have left any time, but it was just too comfortable. You know, after 60 years of her husband fooling around on her while making $1 billion, some women stay in a bad relationship because it's the only choice they have. And, you know, she is not that kind of woman. She has a lot of say in what goes on and was, for better or worse, an equal partner in a lot of the real estate stuff. Is she on the tape? No. Was she banned from the NBA for life like her husband/ex-husband/estranged husband? No. But, you know, by association, her hands aren't exactly clean.
All right, well, let's talk about the other female character in the story, shall we? Miss V. Steviano, Donald Sterling's longtime mistress, which, by the way, the mistress-wife culture on rich people is fascinating to me. Like, I guess they're just cool with it. I mean, who am I to judge, right?
Live it's a velvet prison.
No, I don't know if it's a prison. It seems more a lifestyle. It's just the way they want to be. And if it works for them, works for them. I mean, I wouldn't judge somebody who wasn't a billionaire who said that was fine. But like, V. Steviano is quite the mistress. It seems like she really broke the mold of the other mistresses.
She kept telling people she was going to be the next Mrs. Sterling. She would stalk Shelley. She would watch where Shelley would go, and then she'd show up. And I do remember at the one time she went into the restroom where Shelley was, just paraded around, showed off herself. Then Shelley walked out.
Nobody wanted to go to the Clippers. No one even knew the Clippers existed until I came into the franchise.
She's like, they owe me everything.
It's very
bringing
true.
the heat.
And it's not only that. It was prior to bringing the heat and the scandal. It's more like, let's change it up. Let's switch it up.
Toby, what did you think of this woman who, really also had a position of power in the relationship? I mean, she was taping all of her conversations with Donald Sterling, which we'll talk about, and his mental state around that in a minute. But she was sitting courtside with him. She was comfortable having him take her to the department store to buy clothes. She wasn't exactly a secret. And then she also didn't behave the way she was supposed to when things kind of came to a head. She flew a flamethrower into the entire story. What do you think about her, Toby?
When I was listening to that part, it seemed like something out of Henry VIII or something. There's this queen who's sort of shunted off to the side, and the new mistress who's kind of taking her place and sort of trying to assert her power. She's an interesting character. The way they kind of put her forward as being, there's this sort of unspoken understanding in most of these relationships that you don't humiliate the wife and all these other things. The criticism of her is that she doesn't follow these mores or whatever that have been built up around these relationships. And I was thinking, she's protecting herself, right? She's willing to be exploited if she gets her piece out of it, and she doesn't want to be in a situation. She wants insurance, right? So she seemed to me to be calculating, but smart. It's hard to feel like that's a bad move for her, because I think as well as she probably knew Donald Sterling, she had to know there wasn't anything keeping him from just ditching her and the whole thing just ending. So her doing those kinds of things, I think, and asserting herself, I think was sort of a good survival move.
Yeah.
In all humility unto his highness, say hi, long trouble now in his passing, out of this world. Tell him in death I blessed him, for so I will. Mine eyes grow dim. Farewell, my lord. Griffith, farewell. Nay, patience. You must not leave me
What
yet.
are you doing?
I'm reading Henry VIII.
Yes.
I thought it was an appropriate passage.
That was so literary of you. Good thing we happened to be in our library.
Pulled out
this
is a big fucking book of Shakespeare. That's page 1187.
You just opened it randomly to that moment.
That's a table of contents. What the fuck, Rebecca?
It's classing it up.
This podcast just we're gonna get a whole different level of sponsors now. We're gonna get Mercedes and BMW to sponsor our podcast all of a sudden. Now the question that I have about V and those tapes, and then what happens later in the series, obviously we hear that they make this play against Donald Sterling in court by basically having a couple of doctors examine him and certify that he has Alzheimer's and that he's not competent and fit mentally. He's not, right? I mean, I am not obviously excusing his racism, because it sounds like he was racist for a long time, even when he was a lot younger than he is now. But isn't he also ripe for the picking when it comes to being able to tape him saying crazy things and being able to manipulate him and getting him to buy you, $1 million gifts? Or if you're his wife, getting him to also kind of continue to play the court game and do all the stuff you want to do. He's kind of ripe for the picking in a way that makes him a tragic character, not sympathetic, but tragic, if that makes sense. Does anybody agree with me on that?
That's interesting. Yeah, because he's just definitely, it's he thinks he's so much, he's so savvy and he's so much, smarter at doing everything. And he's running the deals and doing all this stuff. But at the same time, he's got this weakness with his ego, especially when it comes to the women and the mistresses. And that's where he ends up just making horrible decisions. And you can just see them coming and you're like, oof. I mean, is that,
one of many fatal flaws, right?
Yes.
I think the phrase is karma's a bitch.
Yeah. I think that's probably more accurate than what I said. All right. Well, let's do what we do. Let's give our thumbs up or thumbs down review to this series, 30 for 30, the latest series from ESPN. It's called The Sterling Affairs. Laura Bricker, what do you think? Thumbs up or thumbs down for this series of podcast episodes from 30 for 30, The Sterling Affairs?
So I'm going to go thumbs up, not necessarily because I love basketball or anything. I did play basketball when I was younger, but
what?
I know, another secret thing of my life. They just keep happening. But it was like a very well done podcast in terms of, this reporter clearly has covered the NBA. She has access to the people that were involved in the stories. We have the tapes. I think there is really something to be said for actually hearing Donald Sterling on the tapes to really give you the full scope and sort of really understand what this story is. So thumbs up.
Laura would dribble underneath the other players.
Yeah.
She would investigate what they were up to before the game.
Exactly.
Ruin their lives.
Yeah,
and then just go in and win. Yep. Toby Ball, what about you? Thumbs up or thumbs down for this series from ESPN's 30 for 30, The Sterling Affairs?
Yeah, I give it a thumbs up. I really liked it. They tell the story very well. I think they have good insights into it. I don't think when it was happening, necessarily all of the sort of context and stuff was quite as obvious as when you go through it now. And I think there's also, it's kind of the story of the Sterlings is also pretty interesting. So I think all around it was a good podcast.
I'm going to give it a thumbs up too. I didn't love it as much as I loved the Bikram series from 30 for 30. I think mostly because the Bikram series had other overlapping layers of story. It's not because this one was more athletics oriented and league oriented. I will tell you, this would have been heightened one more level for me if there had been more of the kind of broader ripple effect societal stuff. Like, for instance, I would have loved, sort of a little bit about what else is going on in sort of other leagues and sports at the time and give us that bit of context. But that's a quibble. Overall, I think this was a very strongly reported, well done series. I really love the host, Ramona. I do love a sports reporter becoming a podcaster. There is sort of a pace to delivery of somebody who's used to kind of doing play-by-plays and interviews that a sports reporter broadcaster would do that works really well for podcasting. So it's definitely a thumbs up for me. What about you, Kevin?
I'm a thumbs up. I can't recommend this for people who are strictly true crime and wouldn't want to branch out into some other story about bad behavior. But beyond that, I think this is a very good podcast. It was put together very well, and all of the competencies are here. It's one really good long-form radio piece, and I mean that with high regard. It's an excellent podcast. It does a good job at showing the downside of the dog-eat-dog world of basketball.
Moving on. Netflix is out with season 2 of its popular and triumphant show, Mindhunter.
January 1974. They just moved in 2 months prior. My partner and I were first on the scene. He was feeling for a light when something bumped him. That's when we found the little girl hanging from this pipe. Jesus.
This time, Holden, Bill, and Wendy are taking their FBI research on serial killers and attempting to apply it in the real world. A new director at Quantico wants the behavioral science unit to profile the killer in a string of child abductions and murders in 1980s Atlanta.
This is $100,000, and it's all yours if you help us identify the persons behind the murders of our children in Atlanta.
Another child reported missing in Atlanta. I'm sending you both. I want you there for the duration.
Over a period of 7 months, 11 children have disappeared. 8 have been found murdered. Not one case has any suspects or even a viable witness.
Tell them what you told me.
I'm with the behavioral science unit. I study serial killers.
In addition to watching the pioneering profilers interview some of the most infamous serial killers of their time, the show follows through on last season's foreshadowing about trouble for Bill's adopted son. Director David Fincher's exacting vision is apparent throughout the series. Now, we are going to be talking about plot points for Mindhunter Season 2, so to remain spoiler-free, go to the time code in our show notes to hear our thumbs up or thumbs down reviews. All right, now this season of Mindhunter is a little bit different. Last season was very much focused on Holden and sort of his ascendancy and maybe genius and, maybe kind of being a pioneer, to a little more of subplots, specifically featuring Bill and his adopted son and wife, and Wendy, who we learn in season 2, even though we had kind of, heard about it in season 1, we sort of see it play out in season 2, is a lesbian in the early 80s, and sort of the complexities of navigating the relationships along with her job and the sexism that exists there. What do we think of the turn that Mindhunter made this season, sort of exploring the broader world around these characters? Toby, what do you think?
I didn't like it.
No?
No. Well, so there's the two big subplots. There's the son who may or may not, well, he definitely has some psychological issues, but whether he's like a sociopath or not. And then there's Wendy and her relationship with this other woman. And my feeling was the whole Wendy subplot, that's basically the only thing that she does in this entire series,
right,
is be in that subplot. And the subplot is completely tangential to the main thrust of the story. So, I had a similar, and maybe this is why it kind of like stuck out to me so much, but I had a similar issue in my last book in that I had a character who just didn't really do much to move the story along. And, I spent a lot of time talking to my editor. He was trying to talk me into just getting rid of that character and saying, if she's not advancing the plot in any way, it weakens your book. And I kind of felt like Wendy weakened the series because there's never any payoff. I mean, it wasn't even really that interesting a story, in my opinion. And then it didn't connect at all to anything else. And then it kind of fizzled. So the only reason I could see to have it is just because you wanted to keep Wendy around because maybe the next season she has something going on. But I don't think anything would have really changed if you'd started off with like, oh, I'm going back to Harvard and teaching because I'm done.
Right.
And it wouldn't have changed anything of the rest that happened in that entire series, as far as I can tell.
Kevin is raising his hand, literally. What do you got, Kevin?
Well, no, I agree with some of Toby's assessment. I think that Wendy, her plot line was kind of a waste, in part because it suffers in comparison to the other things going on. There's so much drama in Bill's B-plot, as well as sort of the main action. And Wendy's romance, a more era-appropriate thing would be a little more of the tension of being a secretly lesbian couple in this community. It doesn't really kind of explore that. It does a little bit, but it doesn't really deliver the goods. The other stuff is much more interesting, I think. I thought at the end of season 1, where Wendy was sort of being confronted with the real world around her research, I thought maybe that there was going to be more of like her out on the road and having to face these demons that are just characters on a piece of paper. Having to get, real with them might be something for her to reach out to. Out of the 3 characters, she was the most disappointing this season for me.
I'm raising my hand now, okay?
You don't need to. You're running the show.
I know, but can I just tell you what I think was going on here? Because this is really what I think.
Yeah.
I think there are a bunch of scenes left on the cutting room floor because there were hints. One of my underlying theories about this whole show, and I think it bears out even more in season 2 than it did in season 1, and I made the same argument in season 1, Kevin, and we argued about it, is that the show's, one of its messages is that profiling and the BSU is like junkie science and total bullshit. It's like a foundation of bullshit. They don't actually solve crimes. Because they hint a couple of times in this series, like when Wendy goes with the other dude, what's his name, Greg?
Greg.
I don't even know his name. He was so boring.
Yeah.
Nobody likes Greg.
And interviews the one killer and, reveals that she's gay in the interview and then has to lie about that to her colleagues, saying no, that's just something I said, even though it was an effective way to get him to talk. They talk a lot about the psychosexual motivations of these killers. And in the background, we're seeing the BTK killer wearing women's clothing and choking himself out with a doorknob, wearing that creepy clown mask. And what I wonder is, whether or not what was supposed to be, maybe some scenes that were cut, where the conflict is really that there are evolving theories in the behavioral science unit around homosexuality and, being gay, sort of being tied to some of the characteristics of these killers, and Wendy's conflict about herself being gay and also being a psychologist contributing to these sort of wrong-headed bullshit theories. That's where I thought it was going. And maybe it will in the next season, but that's kind of what I thought they were laying the foundation for here.
I'm going to mansplain one little thing to you. Because you always say this. I feel like they cut stuff out.
Yeah.
Meaning that you're giving them the assumption that they did the right thing.
No, I'm not.
And it took it away. I think what you need to, how to express that is to say, there are things that are missing.
Okay.
Because you've given them the credit for doing the right story and then fucking it up. Where I think they just didn't do it in the first place.
All right, Laura, question for you.
Yes.
The second big side plot here is Bill Tench's son a serial killer / psychopath / sociopath? I mean, he was involved in a fucking murder, which is crazy.
Yeah.
A baby. Toddler. 22 months.
Fuck. Did he go missing from his home?
From the park. 50 yards through the woods there. He was tied to 2 pieces of old flooring, very carefully placed.
On a cross. Crucified.
Is that subplot too on the nose and too much, considering what these guys do for work?
Yes. Yeah, I felt like that was the least believable subplot of this particular season, because it was just like, oh yeah, of course the guy from the FBI's son is a serial killer, and of course he didn't see it coming, and now he's trying to analyze his own kid and wonder what he, missed. And of course he doesn't know his whole background because he's adopted, but I just felt like it was just a little bit too coincidental, and I had a really hard time with that part of the story, because I'm like, really? Although it did at the end when his wife just picked up and hit the trail, it did take a little bit more interesting of a turn. But it was like the way that the social work lady was visiting the house and then totally changed her tune when she was like, oh, you're studying, whatever he was.
Oh,
yeah.
Everybody loves Bill's stories about his job.
Yeah.
That is one of my favorite things the show does.
Yeah. So
honestly, because it is super realistic. Like everybody Bill talks
Everybody
to.
from the FBI director down to the social worker.
Yeah, the mailman.
Really? What was Manson
The guy
like?
at the barbecue. Everyone just wants to know.
I'm in a unit that studies repeat offenders.
Things like what?
We deal specifically with people who commit compulsive crimes.
What is that exactly?
Like Son of Sam, Boston Strangler, like that.
How do you study them?
We interview them.
In prison, they talk to you.
Some of them can't stop talking.
Who do you talk to? Give us one example. Yeah, what do they say?
It's not really barbecue conversation.
Do they tell you why they do it?
That's the one kind of clever meta thing that goes on. It's like a comment on the little true crime wave right now. It's yeah, everybody loves this shit.
Yeah.
But also our fascination with profiling in general.
Mm-hmm.
That it's you can divine different things and, these patterns are really interesting. And so, it's the closest to a Sherlock Holmes that we have in actual law enforcement.
Except it's bullshit and doesn't actually catch anybody. All right. So, Toby, you also thought the subplot about sorry, Kevin. You also thought about the subplot about Brian, which is a little bit too perfect, right?
I think Laura hits it right on the head. I would even go a little bit further to say that because he's adopted and they adopted him when he was relatively, he was 3 or 4 or whatever, Bill is sort of absolved for having caused any of this, right? So it's just, there's no fault of his or his wife's, which would have been, I think, more interesting. And even the whole thing about the crucifixion and how that was his way of wanting the kid to come back to life. So
what
it was
the hell
actually,
was that?
even though, and everybody just kind of accepted it. It was
yes.
This really positive reading that you've given of what happened, I totally buy it.
Your son was present for the murder of a baby.
Yeah.
And when
right.
he, and he
then
just
put him on a cross.
Yeah. It's fucked. If this happened, and first of all, I mean, one of the things that's really unrealistic is that the wife wants to move away, and I'm like, yes, you guys should fucking 100% move away.
Yeah.
Your kid was present at a murder, and complicit in the murder of a baby. And like Bill's pretending like he doesn't think that look, kids will get over it. What are you talking about, Bill? You know better.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
You know, I thought they might go a little bit into the mom blaming that always seems to happen in these things. And even that doesn't happen.
You're disappointed that the typical thing didn't happen.
Well, but I mean, it's just, they don't explore anything. I mean, it's just, it kind of happens. And then there's sort of anguish about whether they should move or not, or what's wrong with our kid.
Or that Bill works too much, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Bill works too much, but there's none of the stuff. There's no animosity directed towards them.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, the only interaction that you really see is this sort of like creepy lack of animosity from the mother of the dead kid.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Listen, it was the
found-
70s and the 80s. Like that in that period in time, like people didn't really care a lot about stuff.
They could have done like 6 episodes and cut out both those subplots, and it would have been much tighter.
And I think when you were saying before, Toby, about sort of like the, fascination with true crime, one of the things I picked up on the beginning of this series, I thought it was really interesting. I think Bill was telling one of his stories to somebody either at a cookout or a party, and it was like, talk about role reversals. All the women were like, oh, horror, we don't want to hear about this. And now it's like women are like the main consumers of true crime.
That's right.
But they made a really big point of like, oh my God, I can't believe you're talking about that,
When we interviewed Richard Speck,
You sat in the same room with Richard Speck?
You never told me that. I didn't sleep for a month after that happened. Did you, Harriet?
I don't like to hear about things like that, but I make Rod turn off the news or I'd never sleep.
I like the way Bill's character developed over this season.
I love Bill.
Yeah, he became much, in my view, more likable. But what was missing is that there wasn't a lot of conflict. Last year, there was a lot of conflict between him and Holden. And you seem to be very aggravated with him in episode 1. And all this time, stuff's going on, and I'm waiting for him to explode. Right? He's got all this shit going on, and like when he finally tells Wendy something, it's like, well, we got this thing going on, and my dad's, and then he finally tells Holden, on the banks of the river, and again, it's like, well, if you must know, this is what's going on. And it just seems like the emotional payoff isn't there. I mean, he's got all the weight of the world on him, and he's not showing it.
It's very matter of fact.
Yeah. So I thought that could have been a little better, but all in all, I did enjoy his character the most of the three of them this time.
All right, well, let's talk about the involvement of the Atlanta child murders investigation in this season, because it is sort of the arc that takes over the season.
It was interesting. Someone should do a podcast on
that. And by the way, I will say, underlines the fact that profiling does not actually solve crimes. What solved that crime, or maybe solved the crime, obviously it's kind of up in the air, is actual police work, because rivers plus bridges equals staking out of bridges. Let's be real. That's how they caught that guy.
But Rebecca, they weren't going to do that except for the profile.
Okay,
he said, I believe this is what's going to happen.
Does it or does it not throw into question whether or not Wayne Williams is actually the perpetrator of all these murders? Do they not ask that question even in this show?
They do.
Yes.
And why? Because he doesn't quite fit the profile they've set.
Exactly.
Which is why they're saying, I think there's somebody else.
Maybe. Who knows? Listen, we all know I have prejudices here. So do you. We both come at this with prejudices. Let's just leave it there. Kevin, what did you think of this pivot into the Atlanta child murder story? Do you think it worked?
I guess it did. I mean, it seemed like it was 2 different seasons. And so, there was the first half where there's still a lot of the research. We're going to go through, the rogues gallery of modern day serial killers. Let's go see Manson. Let's go see Berkowitz. And then it's like, okay, let's try to get this out and be a proactive tool and not just a reactive cold case type of technique. I think it was an interesting historical fictionalized look back at that case.
Toby, what did you think of the way that they handled the community in Atlanta of mothers who are also activists who are trying to get attention to these cases, and their intersection with Holden and his view of a community of victims suffering versus the clinical approach he's being sort of asked to do and the way he kind of is?
By directing the attention of the press to these specific sites, we'll be elevating their perceived importance for the killer.
Perceived importance?
Yes, ma'am. We want him to identify these sites as memorials.
Are these memorials for the families or for him?
For the families, of course, but we need him to notice.
Ruby's still missing. His family might not want a memorial. Mothers need hope. I'm sure you can empathize.
You know, the show was trying to make a statement there of like, yes, we look at these guys as heroes because they're doing all this intellectual work in the basement of Quantico, but we also have this group of moms who are also heroes in their own way and are right that law enforcement and government officials aren't doing anything to protect their kids.
Yeah, I thought that was like one of the strengths of the show. You know, I think the sort of heroic work that the women are doing in the face of sort of official apathy to keep the pressure on in whatever way they could, given sort of limited resources and limited interest from the people who could help them. And then I thought, as you were saying, the interaction that Holden has with them was also well done in that I think he expects them to be grateful, essentially, and they're not. They're like, is this just going to be more bullshit? And at first it is. Yeah, I thought that was a strength. I mean, I thought all the stuff that happened in Atlanta, I either wished they'd only had that or they had more of that, because I thought that part was kind of interesting. And I think they were also smart to move away from the, stop to stop interviewing serial killer stuff, because by the time the last couple rolled around, I was like, okay, I think I've got it now. Like, I don't think I need to see any more of these. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've been super negative so far. I like the show.
Yeah, me too.
Some of the questioning, the Charles Manson thing, it was built up too much, and but the Berkowitz one I thought was kind of interesting. And
it's very true to the actual interview that they did in real life.
Is it?
Yeah.
Did he really say that thing about how it was bullshit?
Yes.
That happened.
Yeah, they basically just said, okay, cut the bullshit. We know that's not true. And he went, yeah, you're right. And then it just went on from that. Yeah. Yeah, he admitted to them.
Okay, so I didn't know that. I was actually going to, I figured you probably did, and I was actually going to ask you that question.
All right, I actually love the Manson scene. I'm not going to lie. I don't know obviously Toby doesn't agree, but Laura.
Yeah. Don't look at him.
Even though
he's small.
It was tangential.
Yeah.
It was tangential, and it didn't advance the plot. But if nothing else, whoever that actor was playing Charles Manson just fucking nailed it. It was an incredible, granted, it did stray into the area of impression rather than performance. I loved it.
You seem to have a hold on them, even from prison. But no matter what they say, you maintain the same story.
Because my truth is simple, and your truth is complicated.
Complicated how?
Well, you don't see it, but the only truth is now. Now is the only thing that's real.
Well, we're mainly interested in then. How you met, influenced, and indoctrinated the people who followed you.
Indoctrinated? Come on, man.
How did the family begin? Did you start with the girls?
These people you call a family, they're just children that you didn't want. You threw them out like trash. So I picked them up off the side of the road and I said this: in love, there is no wrong.
Love. That's what you taught your family?
I liked the Manson part, and then I liked the follow-up where Holden then went a step further and went to go meet with Tex, who had actually been there when the murders happened. And I felt that was a really good scene. And that was really interesting to hear. I mean, it was horrific to hear it recounted in just sort of a matter-of-fact way, but it also added some context to, in dramatization in the show, how people were following Manson and what it was actually like at the time that they were, you're like, how the hell could these people have, like, really, but that, I think that was a really interesting scene to kind of put a little bit of context into that.
So can we talk about why everything is yellow?
Please. I feel like I was watching The Simpsons the entire time I was watching the show. Everything was yellow.
Wendy was the most yellow of anybody in this whole show.
She was yellow as hell. She was
Her makeup.
Yellow. Yes.
There's yellow in like almost, I don't want to say every scene, but it's very predominant.
The Tenches have a yellow car.
All of their outdoor furniture is yellow. In the headquarters of that task force, there's yellow newsprint covering the windows. The telephones are yellow.
The decor in the hotel is yellow.
In their apartments, so yellow. And it's not by accident. David Fincher is notorious for being a perfectionist about every shot has to be a certain way.
He loves color story too.
So the question becomes, what do they mean by yellow?
Well, I'm reading right now. I just looked up to find out because I think of yellow, I think of sunshine and happiness, but apparently yellow also represents cowardice and deceit.
Yeah. Also disease and
Caution.
putridity and caution. I think that's what it symbolizes, this aura of menace, that something is wrong and not something is ill. And I feel like that's what that color scheme in this setting means.
It is kind of a pukey yellow. It's not like a bright, sunny yellow.
Kind of mustardy. Yeah, jaundice.
I think is.
Yeah.
Right, it's illness.
It was so like we have a, full disclosure, like a spectacular television because Kevin is like an AV guy. So we're watching this, in like 27K or whatever. And we can actually see when we watch it, the makeup lines on the actors on their jawline where they go from yellow to like more fleshy color. So it's very intentional.
It's on purpose.
It's very intentional.
To catch the yellow light. It's not white fluorescent light. It's this yellow incandescent light. It's an interesting choice.
It did feel like I was watching The Simpsons, though. It really did. All right, well, let's do what we do. Let's give our thumbs up or thumbs down review for Mindhunter Season 2, available for binging right now on a Netflix screen near you. I'm going to switch it up tonight. Toby Ball, what do you think? Thumbs up or thumbs down for Season 2 of Mindhunter?
Yeah, I'll give it a thumbs up. I mean, I think the totality of it is good, and I certainly enjoyed watching it. It's seriously flawed. I think there was potential for it to be great, and it's not great. I think parts of it are, but as a whole, it isn't. So a solid thumbs up.
What about you, Laura? Thumbs up or thumbs down for Mindhunter Season 2?
I'm thumbs up. So yeah, Holden pissed me off this season. And there was some plots that I felt like subplots. I was like, why are they here? But I will say I binged this whole thing in like 2 days. So it is extremely watchable. And, I'm not going to complain about it.
Listen, I completely agree with you. This is one of those shows. We talked about this a little bit around the clearing on our after show last time. Like, you say what you want about whether or not it's perfect or imperfect, or there are things about it that are annoying or things about it that you don't get why they did it. Like, we wanted to watch the next episode every time an episode ended, which means it's a good show. It's an entertaining show that we enjoyed. Like, I really love this show. And yeah, it's imperfect, but I'm giving it a big thumbs up too. What about you, Kevin?
I'm a thumbs up. Like Toby said, I think that Season 2 is flawed. I wish they could go back and rewrite a couple of scenes differently and resolve some things in ways that they hadn't. I still like the idea of the premise of the whole series. We're in this pioneering days of looking at the psychology of serial killers. And I call it the Shakespeare in Love thing, where, like in that movie, we know more than the characters do about the way these people operate. Watching those guys work is still, I think, an intriguing narrative. I like it. I give it a thumbs up.
Now it's time for my favorite part of the podcast, a little something I like to call the
crime of the week.
Wendy Auger of Rochester, New Hampshire, is telling the New Hampshire DMV to piss off. The state sent her a letter saying they were recalling the vanity license plate she's had for 15 years. The offending tag, PB4WEGO, or P before we go. Although every parent can relate to this command, the state says it violates their policy on offensive vanity plates. Wendy's reaction? Come on. The story soon went viral with over 100,000 stories in print, TV, and the web. But it looks like Wendy will get to keep her beloved P before we go license plate. Our very enthusiastic governor, Chris Sununu, called her to say he squared it away with the DMV and the plate is hers to keep. Incidentally, this is not the first time the governor has intervened in such lofty matters. Sununu is famous for using his bully pulpit to convince a local supermarket to stop placing the stickers across the opening of their deli bags, thus ruining the press and seal. Because of New Hampshire's weird and cheap pricing structure at our DMV, there are over 150,000 vanity plates driving around a state with a population of fewer than 2 million people. Yeah. What is the best vanity plate you have ever seen?
Is on a hearse. and it was "You Are Next."
Oh, wow!
Appropriate for
It's fucking
this.
dark.
I know. Well, I thought it was appropriate for this crowd.
Yeah.
Toby, well, what about you? What's the best vanity plate you have ever seen?
I worked with this woman who had, it was DZKNEE. What do you think that spells out?
Easy.
Tell us, Toby.
Well, I couldn't figure it out for weeks. And I was like asking her, she's like, just look closer, just look closer. I was like, Dizzy knee, D's knee, and it's Disney.
Oh.
She's one of those adult Disney people, isn't
those
she?
people.
Yes, she definitely was.
Wow. Well, my favorite vanity plate is a car that parks in the parking lot where I work that has a plate that is very innocent, but is constantly misinterpreted as being extremely dirty. And the plate is MY2CNTS, which clearly, if you're not disgusting, says my 2 cents, but looks like something completely different.
I think Laura Bricker saw it in her mind.
Yeah.
What about you, Kevin?
This is a deep cut, but I think folks of our generation are going to like this. I once saw an Astro, and the license plate was Tralfaz.
Nice.
Do you get it?
No.
From the Jetsons?
Jetsons reference.
Yes, the dog was adopted, and the owner came, and he said his real name is Tralfaz. Tralfaz. And it's brilliant.
All right, we should probably end it on that note, but before we do, Laura Bricker, do we have a cat of the week this week?
It's Tralfaz.
It is Mousterd, which is Dutch for mustard, from our friend Lucy in the Netherlands. And this is an appropriate cat for this week. Like Kevin, she was also radioactive after she had some iodine injected. I took her home from the shelter where I volunteer because she was just wasting away, not willing to take meds. She took them okay when I brought her home, but they weren't enough, so I brought her in for iodine treatment. She had to stay in the hospital for 4 nights. I had to be extra careful with her urine and excrements. We've heard this story tonight. For 3 months. But she is all better and so happy, and I hope to keep her healthy. Wishing Kevin all the best for a speedy recovery. Lucy from the Netherlands.
Thanks, Lucy.
Yes. Lucy, you're the
Danke.
best. I don't want to say you're not as good as the woman who sent us t-shirts and a travel mug in the mail, but you're pretty great.
Yeah.
You're pretty great, Lucy. All right, Laura Bricker, if people want to send you their suggestions for cat of the week, doesn't have to be a cat, by the way. It could be a dog or any other kind of animal.
It could be, but I've been having cat dreams lately, so it was a cat this week. So they can send them at Laura Bricker on Twitter.
And Toby Ball, if folks want to reach out to you and talk a little sports ball and podcasts, how can they find you online?
They can find me at TobyBallNH. And I'd like to do a quick plug. The day after this drops, I'll be on Dialogue, which is DIE-alog with Rebecca Sebastian.
Yep.
It's sort of a talk show about true crime.
Kevin Flynn, if folks want to reach out to you and find out what special projects you are involved in, how can they find you on Twitter?
I'm at Kevin P. Flynn.
And if you want to follow me on Twitter or Instagram, you can find me at Reb Lavoie. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Crime Writers On, and I encourage you to join the amazing community in our official Crime Writers On Facebook discussion group. You can also go to our regular old Facebook page and find a link there. Support the show at patreon.com/Partners in Crime Media. You'll get our Crime Writers On after show right now. You can hear our conversation about plagiarism in podcasting. Our theme song was performed by the New York Ska Jazz Ensemble and used with permission. This show was recorded in the Yoga Loft above the Bodega in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, but not Studio C, the closet in our basement where Kevin recently walked in and was shocked to see all the furniture had been removed while he was away.
What?
On behalf of all the crime writers, thanks so much for listening. We will catch you later.
Hold on, I've had a breach. I'm going to go get this cat out of here.
Cat breach. It's like bee stings, but not as bad. Cat breaches, they're like cancer, but for cats.
You know why I put the bee sting on Twitter, don't you?
Because Meredith broke her foot?
Meredith broke her foot and said she was trying to make Rebecca feel better. So then I said I got stung by bees, but don't feel any pressure. And somehow this turned into a bee sting shaming. And then she got back to me today about having a 4-year-old who was throwing up all over the place.
Oh, no.
And I was like, okay, I fold.
I mean, basically what this is about is that men are babies and women are tough. That's what it's about.
Fuck off, Rebecca.
Partners in Crime Media.
You can start your day off right when you find a professional on Angie to get your plumbing right first. Connect with skilled professionals to get all your home projects done well. Visit Angie.com. You can do this when you Angie that.